First, though, let me bring in Darren Grimes, the director of Reasons UK, a Conservative channel from the right, and we are hoping to be joined very shortly by Dawn Foster, the journalist at Jacobin magazine from the left. Darren, lots going on today. I'm quite breathless about it, but I want to pick up first with what we just heard from Chichi Wanaku, who is the artistic director at Chineke, who was one of the first people to complain to the BBC about the inclusion of Land of Hope and Glory and Rule Britannia in the last night of the proms. She says, Darren, this sort of compromise, or fudge you might say, by the BBC is not actually acceptable with her because the orchestral version of the song's still going to be performed.
I mean, to be honest with you, Dan, this was the sort of pathetic attempt at a halfway house that we've come to expect from the BBC. I mean, to be honest with you, the BBC shouldn't be pandering to these activists at all. No one listens to Land of Hope and Glory or Rule Britannia and thinks of slavery or any of those other connotations that seem to be expected by these activists. I really just think that, as the Prime Minister set out, and by the way, isn't it good to have Boris Johnson back? I was so happy to hear him actually say, you know, I really wish the BBC would just ignore this sort of thing by, his language, the language he used really was what you'd expect from Boris. It was stereotypical Boris, and we've heard all of these rumours about him leaving office in little 6 months or so. I don't think that's the case. I think we've got Boris back if he continues like this, because at the end of the day, Dan, these activists absolutely must be ignored because it's dangerous, pulling down our history, rewriting history, telling us that this one cultural event that we have once a year in which we sing one patriotic song is unacceptable for some bizarre reason. We can't even have this one event. The Prime Minister was absolutely right to call on us to, stop this cringe and embarrassment about our history, about our traditions and our culture. And this general fight, he said, of self-recrimination and wetness. And that was Boris at his best. More of that, Dan, I see.
What interested me, Darren, is just before he said it in this little news clip today, he said, they're trying to restrain me from saying this. And that concerned me, actually, Darren, because it made me think that perhaps there are people around Boris Johnson, whether he's referring to advisors or members of the civil service or fellow cabinet ministers, I don't know. But he is making the suggestion that there are people in his life, in his world, that are trying to stop Boris be Boris.
Yes, I mean, to be honest with you, Dan, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that there are people in or around the Conservative Party who are as wet as those activists that are trying to complain to the BBC. I mean, I've just wrote a piece for Con Home on how it is that whilst we all say Twitter isn't the real world, I think increasingly the power of the activists on Twitter are evident in our institutions like the BBC, and even to some extent, I think, parts of Her Majesty's government, it must be said. So it doesn't surprise me in the slightest, but listen, let's take heart in the fact that the Prime Minister is clearly his own person, is clearly someone who said enough is enough. I am not going to allow these activists to destroy our culture and our history and try and denigrate that culture and that history. And he was quite, I guess, brave then if he's standing up against his own advisors, because he was right to do so. And I think the country, watching him on and listening to him on the radio, will be very, very grateful to hear this from the PM.
And let's be honest, this is what people are talking about today. And it's what people were talking about yesterday. And it was on 4 national newspaper front pages. So it's not like he's weighing in on a small issue. This is a big issue for his base. And by the way, Darren, when I talk about his base, I actually talk about real Brits, people outside the Westminster bubble, people who actually care about our culture, our history. That's who I think Boris Johnson's base is. But look, that's the positive about Boris Johnson today, Darren. Something quite shocking and negative, it looks like, is about to happen, at least from my perspective. Yet another government U-turn. Today, it's following the lead of Nicola Sturgeon and forcing kids over 12 at schools to wear masks in communal areas and corridors, which, Darren, to me, is just an extraordinary move. What do you make about this, and what do you think about yet another U-turn from this government?
Listen, there was a case on religious dress by Lady Hale, and it'll seem like I'm going off on a tangent when I say this, but bear with us. And she was the former president of the Supreme Court, and she cited a case on a complainant that was employed as a bilingual support worker at a school. Now, as a devout Muslim, this person was accustomed to wearing a face veil in the presence of adult males, and the school refused a request to do so when working with male teachers because she was obscure in her face and mouth, and that impeded her communication with the pupils. And the school had conducted a comparison of her work with the veil on and with the veil off. Now, I just wonder, Dan, in cases such as this, why are we going about adding another impediment that will, the masks will be another impediment to that sort of communication with pupils? Now that we've unchained our schools, why are we now finding more barriers to the education of that next generation that has been hit by COVID more than any other? I can't really grasp why the government are doing this when there's no conclusive evidence that says children are the super spreaders that we might have once feared that they are. We know now with absolute certainty, really, from Sweden and Finland. There was a study there by Sweden's Department of Health, I believe, that says that children are no more at risk in our schools and teachers are no more at risk than any other occupational group. So I do think this is quite misguided, and this is just pandering to the likes of the trade unions, etc. But as far as whether or not this is another U-turn, it clearly is, right? And you do so many U-turns, Dan, and you end up in the U-bend. So I do think the government's got to be a little bit careful about how weak it's starting to look, because if the Labour Party and the trade unions manage to secure enough wins from the government, it starts to look rudderless. It starts to look like it's got absolutely no direction whatsoever and can't think for itself. It's got to stand up on its own feet. It's got to, in my view, absolutely stare down these trade unions with Thatcher-like resolve and get our kids back to school. But I agree with you. I think these masks are nasty, and they're really going to be a real block, actually, to teachers' communication with our students, which is the most vital part of our education system.
Absolutely. And if they were going to save lives, I would be all for it, but I just simply do not think they will. Darren Grimes.
Where's the evidence?
Exactly. Darren Grimes, director of Reasoned UK, a Conservative channel. Absolute pleasure to have you.